Welcome to section 2 of chapter 14, and this one is about the growth and change of cities in general. And so this is still a unit on immigration. So the general question is what impact immigrants have on the growth on American cities, and what's the difference between a rural area and an urban area? So, what is a city? Great video. It's 14 minutes long. I'm not going to play it as part of this, but I highly recommend going into the slideshow and watching this. It's from a guy or a channel called Wendover Productions, and they're great. So this is a bit of a confusing series of maps if you don't know what you're looking at. But if you look at the bottom, I think they're super, super interesting. Oops, go back. So what this shows you is in 1881 how far somebody could travel in a certain amount of time, and this is all centered on England. So you can see green is within 10 days, yellow 10 to 20, and so basically at the bottom you have how far and long it would take. Interestingly, you can see like the dark orange areas, more than 40 days. It's a long time. By I believe this one is 1900, you can see that it's basically distances have halved, or rather the amount of time it takes to travel the same distance has gone down by about half. Same story. This is the modern one. You can actually see the little red dots indicate within a half a day, so 12 hours, you can get to an airport in one of these places. So immigrants are able to get to cities all the more quickly. And so nowadays it's just as common to have an immigrant come to the United States from Nigeria as it is Europe, partially because of this decrease in travel time. Similar map with France, showing the importance of infrastructure. Basically, this is all centered on Paris and how long it takes to get from Paris. Similar story with the city of Melbourne. And so all of that is being said, it's getting around and being able to go places is really, really a big advantage of a city. So part of the reason that immigrants move to these cities, and by I think it's 1920, about 60%, 70% of New York City is that of first or second generation, or population is first or second generation immigrants. And so industry jobs, as we talked about in the first section, those draw people, but also things like trolleys and subways and affordable housing. Really, the same reasons people move to the city now as they did back in the 1880s. This is an image from Scientific American of the T in Boston when it was still brand new. And if you have ever been on the T, you were very aware that it is not a new or particularly well maintained system. So it's just, I think it's kind of neat to see, the green line in particular. That's what you're looking at in new shape. So these are some folks coming into Ellis Island. You can see up here. Literally, the only thing they're bringing with them as far as possessions is the clothes on the back, these little trunks, and that's it. And so the reason immigrants went to particular cities, again, this is really getting into some of the stuff in the last section. It's generally ethnic enclaves. Different groups of people have different, industries back home. And so, Poles from the area of modern day Poland called Silesia, they come for steel because there's coal and iron there. In the modern Pittsburgh, Poles move there because there's coal and iron there as well. Um, and so that's, again, just the pattern that is also true today is, immigrants go to areas with people that are like them and doing industrial jobs or just jobs in general that they already kind of know how to do, with some exceptions, of course. The other really, really important thing to remember is that immigrants are responding to push and pull factors, so reasons to leave a place or reasons to go to a place. But rural people in the United States did something very, very similar and still do. We still have a society where people are moving from rural areas, think like New Hampshire, to urban areas like Boston. So Boston grows, New Hampshire shrinks. Frankly, Western Mass shrinks, Boston and New York grow. And, part of it back then is that money was literally metal. It was harder to get it in the countryside, so you just could not acquire as much cash, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about. And so, even if you had a good crop, you may not get paid because there may be physically no money. In the American South, if you remember from last year, you have groups like the Ku Klux Klan that still exist, a political system that is oppressive towards African Americans, and they flee to the North as well. You can see, in this cartoon, Pull factors above the city: money, jobs, schools, modern, food, housing, wealth, hilly, remote, drought, poor harvest, and poor housing round out the push factors from the countryside. So, in a sense, those folks are rural migrants. All right, this is an image. If we were sitting in a classroom, I would tell you to take a look at and try to figure out what it is. But I'm just going to tell you this is the basement of a skyscraper. And so, one of the technological innovations we looked at in the last unit was steel. And this is how a skyscraper is built. You've got a basement, and then you've got a sub basement with the pipes and these giant, and then below that still you've got giant pillars that go all the way down to the bedrock, however deep that might be, in order to keep the building from collapsing into the earth. It's kind of like a tree, a skyscraper. It goes pretty deep underground compared to what you might expect. This is considered to be one of the first skyscrapers. This is the Gridiron Building in New York City, and it's in, oh gosh, I think the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Very cool building. My cousin actually worked in this building for a little while, but um, it's got this wedge shape. Space is becoming at a premium. That's part of the reason I put this image here. And, so the only way to go is up. And this building is built right in between the maximum amount of building for the least amount of space. And so it's got that wedge. So this is a new technological solution. You can't really build a building more than 10 stories tall, not because you can't keep it to stand up, but because no one wants to climb more than 10 flights of stairs. So there is not a country in the world and not a city in the world where there are towers taller than 10 stories that people live in until Elijah Otis invents what's called the safety elevator, which I love the 19th century because if there's a safety elevator, one might assume there's, I don't know, a danger elevator before this. In reality, what it is it's just he's got brakes that automatically engage, and it's actually the same technology that's still used in elevators. If the elevator drops, hooks come out, it stops it in the elevator shaft so nobody dies. Important for New England, better heating. If you're in a building with radiator heat, this is new technology for the late 19th century. This is a trolley from South Hadley, and so you can see my little picture is on top of it. I can't move myself. Well, in any case, it's pulled by a horse. So the original trolleys were pulled on rails, and they're effectively the equivalent of a city bus. I often hear students say, "Oh, well, the car, made it so people could get anywhere they wanted to." In reality, the trolley systems that existed in this valley and all around the country pretty much got you to all the same locations. There just weren't suburbs. There's more just the downtowns of cities. Part of the reason they got rid of the horses is because they crap everywhere, and that's me being as polite as I'm, or as impolite as I'm going to be about it. Left-hand picture is just city streets. The reason cobblestones used to be put in city streets was to collect, effectively, the horse crap in between the cobbles, and so the streets would generally be flat. They weren't really bumpy, but that's because they were full of so much filth and waste. Obviously not a very healthy situation to be literally walking around in horse crap all the time. So this mass transit system, again, amongst also drawing immigrants into these cities and rural people, they made it so you have the invention of the suburb effectively. So electric trolleys, which by the way, if the power source is green, they are too, and what are beginning to be known as suburbs. In reality, they're really not what you think of as a suburb, with the kind of subdivisions and teardrop shapes, and that's all automobile oriented. This is an area like, say, Florence, Massachusetts versus, downtown Northampton. The wealthy would take a trolley in. It was a little bit greener, and they would come into the main part of the city to do their work in the factory or in an office. This one is in Amherst, by the way, the streetcar system. Dirt roads with metal rails in them, and the streetcars go around. This one is going up Mount Tom, which is kind of cool. And it was, again, an electric streetcar that went right up to the top of Mount Tom, where there was a hotel that people would stay at. And there was actually, I think, 3 different hotels, 2 on Mount Tom, 1 on Mount Holyoke that still stands. And each of them had an electric trolley system to get to the top. And presidents would come on vacation in this valley, basically because it was a beautiful place, still is, of course, but also very easy to get to by public transportation. Mount Tom streetcar map. Again, this is the city of Holyoke, Northampton. The bike path between Northampton and Hadley was a streetcar line, and you could get there again by public transit. So you may have noticed a theme in this unit, or this section rather. This again is, the first subways are built basically because they ran out of room on top of the streets. This is an image, 1890, the oldest subway in the world. It's called London Tube. You can see that with this tube shape right over here. It's building out of the Boston subway system over time. Part of the reason I want to show you this is to show how quickly this happened, relatively speaking. And, if you've, again, been to Boston, you know what a big impact this technology being available makes. It makes it very much more possible to get around without a car compared to Western Massachusetts, again. Should have put music on, like ragtime or something. But unfortunately for public transit in Boston, that's pretty much the end of any new construction right there. Same thing for New York. Here's the same thing for Beijing. You can see it's much more recent. Last 20 years, they built their entire subway system, didn't exist before. So it can still be done. And that was really the point of all of that. London. And the end result of all of this is a city built by immigrants, still inhabited by immigrants and their descendants. This is Central Park in New York City, Manhattan Island. Looking towards the south, you got New Jersey on the right, the rest of New York City to the left. And, some call it the greatest city in the world, and it's honestly pretty fair. So this was also planned to some degree. You can see, again, this is Central Park from above. And there's an event called the Chicago 1893 World Fair, or World Exposition, that basically, first subway demonstration, for, skyscraper demonstrations. Oh, you want to have a electric tea kettle? Well, that's going to be demonstrated at the World Fair. And so people are showing off what they just refer to as progress. This gentleman, Frederick Law Olmsted, he's very, very famous, designed Central Park, also Forest Park and Springfield. So Springfield is a peer city. It's growing up. It's, becoming prosperous at the same time as cities like New York. This is an image from that World Fair in Chicago. They built a city, effectively. They call it the White City. And this was built specifically for this fair where, people from every country in the world came to the United States to show off their new technology and show off the results of industrialization in their cities. And the US was trying to do the same thing. So it was also the first demonstration of electric lighting on a large scale, and it apparently you could see it from hundreds of miles away, just beaming over the world. And people were really optimistic because, think about it. This has never happened before, and you see this. Incredible. So not all is hunky-dory. Immigrants end up living often in crowded tenement buildings. These are clotheslines in these buildings that are so tightly packed that there's really no place for the clothing to go otherwise. Airless, they're dark. In New England, we really don't have the same level of tenement building as a city like New York City or Baltimore, for example. You get something called a triple decker, which I think I have some pictures of in the next couple slides. Yep. If you've ever been to Worcester, Chicopee, Springfield, Boston, this is kind of the New England version of a tenement, and they're much more livable. I actually lived in one of these when I lived in Chicopee, and it was a great apartment. I think this is Holyoke. I can't remember, though. Oh, no, Fall River. Oh, this also happened. And so I just want to leave you with this. A man ziplined across the top of the Brooklyn Bridge before it was completed because there were no rules in the 19th century. And that is all for this section.